So, James, yesterday you wrote an article that to me kind of said DC seems like a lost cause at this point. There's a lot of optimism at the start of the Trump administration that some reform could be done. There's still this window where things could turn around and America's decline could be arrested if the right types of policies were put into place. And it seems like you're saying that window's out now. We're kind of past the phase of reform, and we should really prepare for this major financial decline and the effects that it's going to have. Is that correct?
More or less, yeah. I mean, let's look at where we were a year ago. A year ago, just over a year ago, you had the guy with decades of experience who was shaking hands with thin air, went out and humiliated himself on a national stage, in a debate, and showed himself to be dementia-ridden, just feeble, intellectually feeble
Hunter
guy.
Biden now says that is just because he was on Ambien. So, did you see that?
Yeah, apparently. Or I mean, remember at the time they said he had a cold.
Yeah.
That was. The
I know
excuse.
that when I have a cold, I often get little bits of dementia. But
yeah, exactly. And is that on the? I've never taken Ambien. Is that one of the side effects? Common side effects include dementia.
I think that was like the Roseanne Barr thing, where common side effects included like racist tweets,
racist tirades. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But I mean, we rolled from that into, the guy getting shot at, jumping up, pumping his fist in the air, which I don't know if I've ever quoted Mark Zuckerberg in my life, but Mark Zuckerberg said, I think, kind of captured the moment. We said that was like one of the most badass things I'd ever seen, regardless of like however you feel about the guy or wherever on the political spectrum. To somebody to get, to be almost millimeters, centimeters away from having his brain splattered all over the place to jumping up in the air and pumping his fist and saying, fight, fight, fight. That's pretty badass, And then
that's your first reaction. That's a good sign for leadership.
That's a good sign
in America.
That's a good sign that's exactly what you want Putin and Xi Jinping and all these guys to see. That's who you're up against. And then we rolled from that into this rekindled bromance with the wealthiest guy in the world, who, also happens to be seemingly a pretty hardcore kind of anarcho-libertarian, very limited government, very open, free, and who was out there advocating for government efficiency, cutting spending, cutting waste, and then said, I'll even be the guy to do it. I'll kind of pony up my own time, my own energy, my own money. I'll assemble this team of people to go out and do this. And then, then the election happened. It was an overwhelming, I think an overwhelming statement of what people were looking for. And it was all, the inauguration, it was all the tech titans and everybody there slapping each other on the back. And, it's the golden age is here and all this stuff. And everything looked great for like the first month. And then all of a sudden, March comes around, they start talking about this tariff stuff. And then April came around and they actually had their Liberation Day and, sort of turned the world upside down. And we talked about that a lot. If you remember, we were saying like, God, this is completely idiotic. However, there's also a possibility that this is strategic, and it's the president being strategically ambiguous and strategically crazy because it's easy to believe that guy could be crazy. So maybe he's deliberately acting crazy because it'll be easy for people to believe, and he's just doing that to try and get a good deal. And the guy who's got more negotiation experience than anybody in the history of politics is doing this deliberately to try and get. So, we kind of looked at it from both sides, but then just things started to slide, one by one. And now, you've got the end of the relationship with Elon. Elon's out. All of the hundreds of billions of dollars of spending cuts that they identified were basically for nothing, because now, Congress has gone in to put this recension in for a big fat whopping $9 billion. And that's it. And that's all you get in terms of the cost. And so there's some people still that say, well, they went and passed their one big beautiful bill, which adds $3 trillion to the debt, ensures a $2 trillion debt and $2 trillion deficit this fiscal year, which is, last time I checked, I think anybody would agree that's a ton of money, and adds an additional $3 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years on top of the other $22 trillion that was already scheduled to be added to the debt over the next 10 years. So now you're talking a total of $25 trillion in additional deficit spending, which will be added to the debt over the next decade. And now the falling out with Trump and Elon, and then another and another and another, and now people are still holding out hope. And they said, well, maybe this is strategic. This is just this 4D chess level thinking, that they're doing this and they're passing this one big beautiful bill just to make sure that they're able to stay in power, and that they have healthy results at the midterms. And after the midterms, boy, then they're coming for the deficit. Then they're going to cut all the spending. They're going to take a chainsaw to all this stuff. Okay, if you really want to believe that, then this Epstein thing comes up. And you go, okay, this is a pretty basic campaign promise. They said, we're going to be transparent with everybody. We're going to tell the truth. We're going to do all these things. And then they had every opportunity to do it, and they just didn't do it. And they kept coming up with these excuses. They said, oh, you meant when I said that all the files were on my desk and I was going to release them? Oh, that's not you. You totally misunderstood me, and then came the gaslighting. Why are you still talking about Epstein? What's the matter with you? Why are you, And it's that, I think, was sort of the nail in the coffin. I think where I'm sure you've seen these too. I mean, people do these like call-in shows, whatever. I mean, I've heard, grown men weeping, and that's the sound of hopelessness, is what that is. It's the sound of hopelessness. It's the sound when people feel like, I put all my sort of faith that this guy was going to do something, and now the most basic thing of just telling the truth, which is, I know that's a lot to ask from a politician, but I mean, when you sort of pick your guy based on like, this is going to be the guy that tells the truth, the most basic thing, and you can't do that. You can't be transparent. And not only you're not going to be transparent, you're not going to tell the truth. Because I think if they had stood up and said, we looked at the files and holy Christ, trust me, you don't want to know what I know. I just saw some things that can't be unseen, and I'm just not the havoc and destruction. I just can't let it out. I'm sorry. I feel horrible about it. Trust me, I really want to release this stuff, but I just can't, because the consequences.
I agree, and I think,
like if they said
leveled
that
with people, yeah,
right. But
it would have been
like
political
Epstein,
fallout. People still would have been mad, but it would have been, you could have dealt with it and moved past it. And this isn't going away. How often these days does something stay in a news cycle for a week and a half? Which sounds maybe a little sad, but
it's true. Like, I mean, it is sticking around, and I don't think people are forgetting about this anytime soon. And so I think my concern is that this is where I think this Obama thing came from. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of a sudden Tulsi Gabbard shows up and says, we got Obama red-handed. We caught him. I've got the stuff here. And, they didn't really release a whole lot of details about it, but they claim, and I just think they're trying to distract their own, they insulted their own base. They insulted their own people, gaslit their own people. And now I think they're just in kind of damage control mode, saying, well, let's give them Obama's head. They'll like that. They'll eat that up. They'll love it. And so I'm just wondering, like, they got to be sitting around trying to figure out what do we got to come up with to dupe these people to get them to forget about Epstein. And I don't think people are going to forget. I just don't think people are going to forget it. I think people are going to hold on to this, and I think there's going to be consequences for it. And the bottom line is, if you can't, I think voters are going to come back with a serious wrath. And if people realize, like, if you can't count on these guys to just level with you, even if you can't tell the full truth, at least tell the truth about the truth. If you can't even expect people to tell the truth about the truth, I can't tell you the truth, but here's the truth about why I can't tell you. Throw me a bone, at least do that. Tell me the truth about why you can't tell me the truth. Do that at least. Because if you can't do that, then how am I going to trust you to do anything else that you promised? And this is no big surprise. We were, a year ago, 6 months ago, whatever, obviously we were, I would say, cautiously optimistic, and we said, look, with this team, the guy I was most excited about was Elon, saying, this is the most successful guy in the history of the world that's going to roll up his sleeves and get busy cutting waste in government, which, the guy has a track record of doing so, running lean organizations. The guy went into Twitter and just cut. He fired, a whole lot of people that he didn't feel like were contributing or adding value. And he turned that thing around and, generate profitability and all this stuff. And it's, to do that to the government is obviously a much more difficult task. But if there's somebody who's going to do it, that's the guy that you want. And the guy who has no fear of anybody. I mean, and he has every reason to. I mean, he put it out there. He said, I just want to make sure my country doesn't go bankrupt. And in exchange, like all these other politicians, they're terrified of him. And I like this is great. And now, so we looked at that and said, this is finally the opportunity. There's a real chance here. And we spelled it out. We said, this is all you have to do. You have to cut $300 billion from the budget. That's what's going to make sure that your debt, your metric is debt to GDP ratio. You want to make sure that you arrest the increase in your debt to GDP level, and then you start watching it go down. How do you do that? $300 billion. You cut regulations. You basically unleash the private economy to do what it does best, which is grow and produce. That's all. It's not rocket science. And I think Elon understood that. Now it's more deficit spending. It's a lot more government largesse. It's spend. It's just instead of like on kind of wokey stuff, it's on other things. Instead of the left's priorities, it's the right priorities. But it's still just an insane amount of spending, and it makes the problem worse. And we talked about this before. Like, I just don't think voters understand. I don't think for the most part voters understand. I mean, they keep electing complete nincompoops into Congress. People who sometimes you think like, does this person even spell his own name? And he's a United States congressman. I mean, it's ridiculous. And how do these idiots get elected? Well, because they have idiots electing them. They have people that don't understand the basics. And, it's really also a question of priorities. And people think that like the number one priority is some wokey thing or some social agenda. The debt is the thing that will hit everybody. And you've got 8 years. This is not, the end of the world is nigh, but you've got 8 years, because in 8 years, the U.S. national debt will be well over $50 trillion. And if you're lucky, your average interest rate would be 6% at that point. I mean, the average interest on the U.S. national debt has been rising at a catastrophic rate. And it's going to close in on 4. It's going to close in on 5. Then it's 6% in 8 years would be a joke. In the 1990s, when it was the everything is awesome economy, and the economy was blowing up. They had the .com boom. You had the internet. You had the U.S. government was running a budget surplus. They still had 7% bond yields in that environment. So I mean, it would be a gift if they were selling debt at only 6%. And so 6% on $50+ trillion, that's $3 trillion. You're looking at easily 40% of all tax revenue just to pay freaking interest on the national debt. Then you got to deal with Social Security, which, oh, by the way, is also going to go bankrupt in 8 years because your Social Security trust fund is going to run out of money. So now you've got another multi-trillion-dollar bailout. You've got another hundreds of billions of dollars added to the deficit just to make sure that the Social Security checks go out. 100% of Social Security benefits are paid out every month. It is a catastrophe. And simultaneously, you have to worry now about who's going to finance the deficits. Because one of your biggest lenders, foreign governments and central banks, they're backing away from buying U.S. government bonds. So who's going to come up with the hundreds of billions of dollars every single year to finance America's budget deficit? You don't have a lot of options. You either have to go and grab that money from the private economy, which means that the government's going to have to pay more, which means interest rates go up, which means debt service costs go up, which makes the problem even worse. Or the most likely outcome is that they lean on the Federal Reserve to just print a bunch of money. And we would say, all happens electronically. We would say print money. And so the Federal Reserve is going to have to conjure trillions, potentially tens of trillions of dollars out of thin air. When they did this during the pandemic, they created $5 trillion in new money, and we got 9% inflation. So what happens if the Fed has to print $20 trillion just to help the Treasury, just to bail out the Treasury Department? How much inflation are you going to get? I don't know, but it's probably going to be a lot. This is not the end of the world is nigh. This is not America's coming to an end, the end of America, any of these sorts of things. I'm not a dire guy, but I think it's, come on, like this is an obvious freight train that's coming, and it's not that far off. And the thing about the Fed is you look at it and you say, if you were to, because the Fed's supposed to be an independent agency. The Fed's supposed to, in theory, the Fed's supposed to do its own thing. The Fed's mandate is to make sure that you don't have inflation. The Fed's mandate is to make sure you have this dual mandate of maximum employment and a stable currency, which means you don't have inflation. So in theory, the Fed should look at this and say, we're not going to print $20 trillion. Are you crazy? We're going to have an absurd amount of inflation, right? So if you wanted a Fed to do that, you would have to first replace key Fed officials with, basically puppets that can be controlled by the White House. Well, what's the White House doing right now? They're out there trying to fire Jerome Powell. I'm no fan of Jerome Powell. I've been extremely critical of this guy. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed, was the guy who said 2 days before Silicon Valley Bank went bust, because of all their rapid interest rate hikes, said, "Oh no, we don't see any problems here. There's no problems in the banking system. There's no problems at all." 2 days later, you had major bank failures in the United States of America. I mean, these guys have missed the boat at every opportunity. I am no fan of this guy. But I'm even less of a fan of the idea that, Fed officials should basically just be puppets, little finger puppets of the White House. And the president called and said, "I want interest rates lower. I want you to print money." And the Fed's going to go, "Sir, yes, sir," and just go and make it happen. That's a total disaster. And yet that's the sort of thing that we're seeing right now. This is a freight train. And I don't think voters understand. I think most people just in general don't have the financial or economic literacy to understand what's coming. And I don't think that, this is not the end of the world. We're not just going to spontaneously combust or any of this sort of stuff, but it's the consequence, the obvious consequence that I think people need to prepare for is inflation. And I think that it's weird to make a connection between Epstein and inflation. But the reality is, if you can't trust them to tell the truth about Epstein, if you can't trust them to tell the truth about why they're not telling the truth, at least throw us a bone and tell us that, fine, tell us that it was so bad that you just can't be honest. You just can't release the files, but at least explain that to us. If we can't trust you to do that, how are we going to trust you to cut the debt? How are we going to trust you to reform all the entitlements that need to be reformed? How are we going to trust you to reform the immigration system? How are we going to trust you to cut fraud, waste, and abuse and not add all this crazy spending to the deficit year after year? How are we going to trust you to do the hard stuff? We've got to go out and get 435 members of Congress and 100 senators on board in 2 houses to actually make something happen. How are we going to trust you to do the hard stuff if you can't even be honest about this one thing? And if we can't trust you to do the simple stuff, you can't do the hard stuff. And if you can't do the hard stuff, this freight train's coming. And you're 8 years away.
It does feel like the last domino in this trust in institutions, which has been falling for years. People don't trust anything anymore, but there was still this hope that maybe with this candidate can be trusted. And, so now you have on the left and the right, obviously neither one is going to address the major problem. But like you're saying, voters don't even understand that this is the big problem. So I want to bring it back. Last week, you talked about Tucker Carlson, who was kind of criticizing having a second passport or thinking outside of your country. He's like, "No, I'm all in on America. I'm going to go down with the ship, essentially. No plan B." But what does he want to be done? Do you think he has a higher opinion of voters? Does he, what could you do if you were the type of person that agreed with Tucker Carlson? Would you go and fight for the right candidate next time?
I've heard guys do this, put this kind of tough talk in the comment sections, and a lot of the stuff that we've written and said. I mean, honestly, it goes back 15 years, since I first started Sovereign Man. And the idea was, the central thesis was always have a plan B. And part of that is financial, because we can see some of these things coming. I was saying 15 years ago, like, it's not today, it's not tomorrow, it's not even necessarily, 5 or 10 years from now, but there's going to come a time where the debt's going to be a huge problem and it's going to cause all these consequences. That's the world that we're living in right now. Okay. The second thing was, it's not just about finance, it's also about things in your personal lifestyle. So you might find at a certain point that your home just becomes almost an unlivable place. And I think there are a lot of people that were in places like San Francisco or whatever, and they moved because their home became completely and totally unlivable. That a lot of America's great cities have become unlivable. And Tucker Carlson talks about this all the time. And I completely agree. And we kind of, part of our central core thesis was, sure, you could look domestically. You might look to another city, across your state, across the country, whatever, but you might also look overseas. There's a lot of nice places in the world. And depending on your personal circumstances, you might find, somebody say, hey, I've got a modest amount of savings, I've got Social Security or a little pension or whatever. I want to go to a place that my money goes a lot farther and I can live a really fantastic lifestyle in retirement. That's hard to do now in the United States with a modest savings and maybe only kind of Social Security as income. But you can do that overseas in a lot of places. You can live in a really, really great lifestyle in a lot of places because that might actually be, for financial needs. It might be because you've got kids and you think, I want my kids to grow up in an environment where they're immersed in another language, or a place where I don't have to worry about some insane, crazy leftist school teacher telling a 5-year-old, maybe you are a girl, and all these, maybe I don't want to have to worry about that. And so I'm going to go somewhere else that has a different set of values. I don't have to worry about my daughter going into her locker room and a 50-year-old man being in there who thinks he's a teenage girl. I mean, all these things that, there are reasons why people might look at that. And there are always people that go, oh no, you gotta stay and fight. And I always like scratched my head when I looked at that. And I'm like, what are you, Davy Crockett? I mean, what is this? You're gonna grab your gun and you're gonna go in the street and whatever. Like, no, you're gonna get steamrolled by a tank, man. What are your priorities here? The reality is, like, in a representative democracy, you don't have a lot of options, really, about changing the system. You can vote. That's what, Obama used to, don't boo, vote. And, you'd encourage people to go to the ballot box. And I think what you see over and over again is that in many respects, that's just a waste of time, because you're in some congressional district and you might have it together. You might be financially and economically literate. You might understand the things that are coming, but the other 600,000 people in your district that are voting, they don't most of those people don't understand that stuff. So, it's the majority wins. And if the majority is undereducated, under nuanced, just doesn't really understand the grand implications of these things, you're going to suffer the consequences of that. So are they, but you're getting, you're not going to get the change realistically that you're hoping for. And I think the political system in the US is such that voting doesn't really bring about change. It just doesn't. I mean, at this point, to really have fundamental change, you would need real hardcore constitutional reform. You need a lot of things that would be so difficult. I hope that somebody like Elon invests his tremendous resources and energy into something like that rather than a political party, because I think he's thinking like, we just need a different political party. And I think, no, you just need a different system. You need new rules of the game. The game is corrupt. The game is broken. You need new rules. You kind of need a reset. And I think, the most peaceful means of achieving that would be serious, hardcore constitutional reform. Doing so, modifying the Constitution according to the Constitution, is a really, really difficult thing to do. And, that's going to be a lot of time and a ton of money. And, that's something that, guys like Elon, whatever, would be able to contribute a lot to doing, and putting very meaningful constitutional reform in place that would include things like a balanced budget amendment and term limits and, all sorts of things. I think even the way, elections are, where you have people in Congress that have to run for office every 2 years. There's just we talked about this before. I mean, their incentives versus an everyday person's incentives. Human beings, by the nature of our multi-decade lives, have a very long-term incentive structure. Politicians have an extremely short-term incentive structure. And so that misalignment between a political incentive structure and a human being's, a citizen's, constituents' incentive structure, that is one of the reasons why we have these problems. I mean, for a president to have a 4-year term, even senator a 6-year term, it's just the wrong incentives. You should want to have people in office who have a very long-term incentive. They have an incentive to do the right thing up front one time, as opposed to having an incentive to continue running over and over and over and be in this institution for decades and decades and have nothing to show for it. I mean, these guys, whether it was Joe Biden or Chuck Schumer or Pelosi, or these people that have been in there for decades, what accomplishments do they really have? Where they can say, you know what, the country is so much better off because of these things that I did. They don't have anything to show for it. And so there's some pretty obvious things, but I think, we're at the point where, like, the system is just so broken that this whole kind of, I'm going to stay and whatever, like, what are you going to do? You're going to vote? You're going to battle it out in the streets with the, with the leftist boogeyman. I mean, I don't really get it. I mean, and so I think realistically, and like, fine, if you want to stay and do that, then so be it. But I think having at least a backup option, a plan B, that's a very rational thing. And so if you feel like, man, one of these days I just might have to get out of here, where would you go? And you probably want to have that figured out before you're packing your bags. And whether that's across town, across state, across country, or somewhere overseas, again, you probably want to have that figured out before you're packing your bags. And if it is something that requires, I mean, there's place in the world you can buy. You can live in certain place in the world. Your cost of living is nothing. You're safe, you're clean, you're free, you feel great. It's super cheap. You can buy a piece of real estate. The real estate costs nothing. You can rent it out on freaking Airbnb and go back, to your home country and live there. And you got some cash producing property overseas. It's putting some money in your pocket. You're paying, might even be able to get financing. You're paying down a mortgage. Somebody else, you got renters paying down your mortgage for you. You're building up equity. You're building up wealth in a place that you actually like to hang out and visit. You got at least a sort of a free vacation home. And if the proverbial ever hits the fan, then you've got a place that you go that you already know that you have, that you like. And I just, I don't see the downside in things like that. I mean, that's the way I look at these things. And the whole point of a plan B is protect what's most important to you in a way that makes sense, regardless of what happens or doesn't happen next. And that's the whole way of thinking. And we talk about this from a financial perspective. We talk about inflation, so you need to be prepared for inflation. This is a freight train that's coming, and it might be here. Even we're talking about 2033. It might be here, way sooner than that. But the reality is, like, there are ways to prepare for that, and we talk about how to do that. And so, if you can buy shares in a really profitable company that produces this asset that's a 5,000-year-old inflation hedge, and they do so profitably. They're wildly profitable at prices now. They're going to be even more profitable price down the road. And you can buy this company for less than 2 times earnings today, and they're successful and they pay a dividend. That's an example of the kind of thinking I'm talking about. That's man, even if gold doesn't go to $5,000 or $10,000, well, you bought a great, profitable, successful, well-managed company for peanuts. You've got a house that you put a very modest down payment on, that you've got other people that are paying down the equity, paying down your mortgage for you. You got a place you could go if you ever need to. And, you don't have to leave town if you don't want to. Nobody says you have to do anything, but at least you have options. You've got something that's generating wealth for you, a couple things that are generating wealth for you. So in an inflationary environment, you're doing okay. You're protected. You have options for yourself and your family. If the need should ever arise, you're protected. That's the whole point. And I don't find any cowardice in that at all. I think that's a completely rational thing. I think that's good. Well, you have a family, you've got kids. I mean, as a dad, you've got to think about these sorts of things. That's why, I'm in fantastic shape. I have a life insurance policy. I don't plan on keeling over anytime soon, but I have a life insurance policy to protect my kids in case that I do, because I have to be a responsible parent. I mean, I just don't find anything about that line of thinking. I'm going to stay and fight, and I got to be all in, and being all in means I'm going to sacrifice my children's future. I just find that kind of thinking ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And just to sort of tie it all in together, the fact that you're in a system right now where the people that we're already hoping for, we're going to come in and reform the system, can't even tell us the truth about why they can't tell us the truth about this issue that everybody in America of all, whether you're on the far left or the far right or right dead center or whatever, everybody wants to know this. Everybody wants to know, and they can't. Nobody on the left or the right is willing to actually tell the truth about this. And we're supposed to trust these people to make the needed reforms to save the economy and save the national debt and save the Treasury Department, all these things from these obvious consequences. No, sorry, I don't buy it. And so I think, I think people have to think about this. What's my plan B? Because if I can't trust them to do something as basic as this, then I can't really trust them to do anything else.
Thanks, James. I think it's
I must be on Ambien because I just went on this rant. So, okay, man, I guess that's it then.